Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of our book talk, which is a series by the Center for International Relations and think tank, where we discuss, as you know very well, inspiring new books, ideas that shape today's words. And today I am really delighted to host Jochen Richter, who calls himself a German and a true European. That's what I like, especially this true European part. He spent over 3 decades working within the European Commission and the European Parliament, so he has really a good sense of both. He now teaches at universities in Luxembourg, Dusseldorf, but also in Lviv, and he is an executive member of the think tank Diplomatic Council, also chairs its Global Security Forum. Johan, hello. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Dada. It's a great pleasure to meeting you in this format.
Pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. Jochen is also one of the editors and contributing authors and inspirator, I think I can call you like this, of a book, very timely book, titled Europe and the Emerging New Global Order that we are going to discuss today. What's really interesting about the book is that it gathers really insights from very renowned experts and examines how Europe can adapt to this rapidly changing international environment. And I'm going to ask Johan about this and about other issues that are in the book. Johan, once again, thank you so much for joining us today. Uh, I like to start our book talk episodes with a big picture. That's why I want to ask you about the inspiration for the book. Why did you and also your co-editors, co-authors, why did you feel that it's a good moment to publish Europe and the emerging new global order now?
Yeah, that is a very fair question. And the answer is quite simple. 2022, February, the unfortunate aggression by Russia on Ukraine was an extreme turning point. And I think we all have been, until the last moment before the war broke out, thought this cannot happen. We all agreed we don't want to have war. It is impossible that all the checks and balances are in place, but they didn't work. This is part of the story. But the other is, of course, that you also see that the world order that was established after the Second World War, mainly led by the Americans, but basically accepted by many others, worked for quite a while, even though if we are now fair, we see that for long, many things didn't work. So we felt there is something brewing, and then you saw an increasing number of academic articles, writers, politicians, and others contributing to this fuzzy debate. How does the world look in, say, 10 years from now? And I think we still don't have an answer, but we need to dive into it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's dive into it because I want to ask you about the subtitle that you gave to the book, Rethinking Europe's Security Framework. And it suggests really that Europe needs to reassess its role in global security. What do you mean by rethinking in this context?
Yeah.
What kind of shift or change do you or and your co-authors, co-editors advocate for? What
Yeah.
change would you like to see?
I think people live under the analysis that only with President Trump, whether it's the first mandate or the second mandate, the United States were telling us Europeans, it can no longer be that we are securing Europe. You need to do more. This goes way back in the past, but we have ignored this for far too long. Now it is really in front of our nose that we need to get our act together. And let's not forget the European Union, in its very early days, were making attempts to get organized. Then, for many reasons that I spare the listeners, some knows this, others will study maybe historical books. This never happened. But if we stand still and just observe, then we shouldn't be surprised that some other parts of the world call us just ignorant bystanders. And we have seen in all these developments that it was even for us Europeans sometimes difficult to convince some countries, be it from South America or Africa or whatever part of the world, to align themselves or at least understand our need for more security. It hasn't worked because we ourselves don't know exactly how much security do we want and how do we want to organize this. One more element, if I may, Ada, and that was really important from the outset. I can reassure the readers, you will not read the 1001st analytical book of what does not work. Of course, we had to give background in each chapter, where are the difficulties that we are encountering. But in all chapters, I reassure you, we have made proposals, and some of which I think of the chapter on the international institutions, starting from UN Security Council to others. They might sound illusoric, but we have to start from somewhere. So, as we say in the concluding chapter, if you don't like what we are saying, come with a better proposal.
So it's a very good beginning for a further discussion, right? Your proposal. And also, what's very interesting, and our readers need to know this, is that you bring together authors from really diverse backgrounds, defense, diplomacy, climate, cybersecurity. Like you really discuss different issues. And how did you coordinate this very wide range of perspectives? And also, do you see from these different backgrounds, different perspectives, do you see something that really unites these voices in their vision of for Europe, or are they really like separate perspectives that we need to gather and make one on our own?
No, there is a bit of a red thread through the book. But let me start from your first point, how to coordinate this.
Mm-hmm.
We developed in the beginning, based on a draft that I initiated, a bit of an idea, what do we want to tackle here in this book? And the idea from the outset was to look at security in a sense of security at large. And that meant exactly, as you said, to bring together specialists from very different areas, including an ethics professor. I return to this issue in a second. And to show that what we decide, for example, in defense, has consequences how we organize civil defense, has consequences how we look at cybersecurity, has consequences on supply chains, and I could continue. So to make cross references between the different security aspects, the second element is to show we cannot do this without engaging in a much larger, and I would claim even today, still not functioning discussion with our societies. A generation like mine, often labeled as baby boomers, cannot talk to now the often labeled Generation Z, that they have to carry the can of what we missed to organize. That's not the way it can function. So we need to explain why freedom and security are essential for our lives and for their lives, because decisions we try now to form now have consequences for this generation, not so much anymore for mine. And that is something we are missing. And this is also the reason why we close this book with a very short chapter, just calling it Call for Action, because we have enough analysis, Ada. We need to do something, and that's the main red thread. What can we do?
There is something very, very important for me about what you just said. You you spoke about communicating about the transparency, and you argue also that Europe must adapt its policies and communicate its decision transparently, explain, as you just said, explain why security is important to also to new generations. And something that we will observe in Europe, in various countries, also in my country, is this rise of um, skepticism towards Europe. Poland is one of the most pro-European countries. However, it's still, we still have some issues when it comes to the perception of Europe today. How can EU institutions, and I'm referring to your very rich experience within the EU institutions, how can they rebuild trust among citizens and really like strengthen democratic legitimacy in these turbulent times?
Well, this is probably the key question number one. If I would have a totally convincing answer, I think I should open a consultancy and sell my ideas for good money. No, more seriously, I think the EU institutions themselves will never be able to do this on their own because the EU as a supranational organization relies and has to rely on a close and good cooperation with the member states. And I think we are struggling for the moment with the fact that for long already, but now it's really under a magnifying glass, local and even national politicians always put a very good hand on their shoulder saying, well done, if a success has reached also the European level. Whenever it didn't go that well, then the person was not on the table and the criticism goes towards Brussels. So we would need a much closer cooperation between both in communication terms. But in fairness, and I'm not blind to this, despite the 30 years of working in the institutions, this is now a little while ago. Um, we are getting more and more bureaucratic. We are getting complicated in the way we are preparing decisions. Look, if we see that we all know we need to support stronger Ukraine in military, but also other senses, then we are not doing badly, but we know we could do much better.
Mm.
And then comes, of course, the tricky question, are we here basically supporting an ongoing war that has terrible consequences? Of course not. We are supporting that country in its defense as an independent country, in line with UN rules and, of course, with all our rules as a democratic organization, as the EU is. But we are struggling, the politicians are struggling to convince a broader society in many countries. I think I had the same discussions in Portugal. Why should we defend Ukraine? The conflict is so far away, and then you have to make them
Exactly.
understand the spy ships just in front of your nose in the Mediterranean is a threat to your own security. But it's sometimes blinded out. Last element. If we were to collaborate stronger, we could save a lot of resources. But as long as we have infights, whether it's important that on a weapon there is a little label that says either Germany or France or Poland, we are still in the wrong mindset. The current call is about innovative mass production, but it hasn't translated yet.
In the title, you also refer to the new global order. You talk about new global order that we obviously observe today. How do you see Europe's place within this emerging or maybe already emerged new system? I'm asking especially about Europe's relations with the United States, China, and obviously somehow Russia, because luckily the conflict, the war in Ukraine that you mentioned, will come to an end one day. We'll hope sooner than later, and we will have to reassess, remake our strategic towards Russia as Europe. How do you see this in the upcoming years?
Now, I would say as of today, we don't know yet what the global order will look like. Of course, we have to recognize that strong politicians, some with certainly tendencies towards autocracy, certainly if we think about Turkey, but there would be others to be mentioned, leave alone Russia. China is a particular case. Um, I think Europe is for the moment struggling to find exactly its position. We were not part of the peace talks that now finally led to the end of the brutal confrontation in Gaza between Israel and terrorist organizations. We are not very much part of the discussions that I see with warring eyes now in the next days and weeks between the United States, Russia, and Ukraine. It seems to be a vicious circle of forward and backward. Um, I, I would say Europe needs really urgently, and now I'm saying something that many people might not like, behind closed doors, because otherwise you cannot have trustworthy, controversial discussions.
Mm.
How do we want to position ourselves towards the United States that at this moment, in my humble opinion, returns to the McCarthy era? So attack your opponents with all weapons possible. I find this very sad. Secondly, this a bit strange belief of the MAGA movement in the US that democracy is a lame duck and was basically developed by bureaucrats. This is a bad combination that goes against our belief that the democracy, with all its failure, is still the best of the bad ways to run a country. Yeah. And I hope we agree. So I think at the moment we don't have really a strategy towards the United States. We still hope that this current administration, let's underline this current administration, returns to old days of good support of Europe. I think this is over, and many realize it. But now we don't know. Does this mean cutting ties? Does this mean being more aggressive? The trade talks showed we are not daring yet to go into confrontation, in the sense not to want a constant fight, but to stick to our position. The outcome of the trade talks, in my humble view, and I hear this also a lot, is meager, to put it mildly. But maybe for the moment, that was the only possibility to achieve. Our
And yeah,
relation towards China equally is very complicated, and we cannot decide, are they now a strategic opponent? Are they a strategic challenger for us? That they are definitely. But how do we deal with this? And reduction, that is very clearly said in the supply chain chapter, the reduction of redundancies that we build up, dependencies, excuse me for the wrong word, the dependencies that we build up over many years are now so strong they start to hurt us. And we need to do something about it. And the colleagues in this chapter are making concrete proposals how to develop alternatives.
something that I observe very often is that when we talk about Europe's strategy, we don't really have any positive, conclusions to leave our readers, our audience with. We talked about security issues, security threats, uh, climate changes leading to the disaster. Can we leave our viewers with something very positive at the very end, something that we should be happy of in Europe and something that we should build on in Europe?
I think it is normal that the freedom that we enjoy is taken for granted. But I give you two examples that made it so clear to me what it means if you don't have that freedom. The first goes back to November 22, when I was for the first time in Ukraine, and I had a nice discussion with the students. at the Catholic University in Lviv. And we were philosophizing, how did it feel? You all of a sudden had no internet anymore because of the war situation. And then there was a long silence in the room until one brave student said, you know, we thought we're going to die, but then we found out you don't die. So you get adopted in a weird situation. It leaves scars on people. And when you meet school children who lost their parents or who get a parent back with no arms or no legs, this is very hard for everybody, not only the person. So this is one part. The second was, I was in May back to Ukraine. And besides being for business visits in Lviv and Kiev, I took a tour with a very interesting person to places like Bucha, Irpin, Mushun. He had lost in the first days everything he had. Fortunately, no family member, but everything he had built from his business to the house was in rubble, not existing anymore. But then at the end, he showed me the place where his cousin had been captured by the Russians. 2 days before I visited, pure coincidence because we met again through an incidental discussion I had. And then I took this tour. His cousin had been released from 2 years Russian captivity. Ada, this person who was taller and more bigger built than me, he looked like somebody who had been freed from a Nazi concentration camp. And that is the reality. So I think we need always to sell to all parts of our society that the freedom we enjoy is worth to do many more efforts in defense. And this doesn't only mean weapons. This means readiness. This means to fight disinformation. A very interesting chapter. I'm very grateful to both colleagues who contributed to this. This means to be much more alert on cyber defense. The colleagues are saying very clearly there are good measures in place, but you need to apply them abroad. If a hospital breaks down because of a cyber attack, we had this across Europe already. I think even in Poland, you had
Yes,
cyber attacks on public
absolutely.
services. This is a drama. This means you can't do operations. So people may be affected in their life situation because ugly attacks were there, but not much care was taken. So the book, again, it brings some recipes. So there is not only dark stories, here is chaos, there is chaos. The colleagues were really trying to bring forward some elements what can be done. And the key word, besides communication, I agree with what you were saying earlier, is cooperation. Let's work more hand in hand. That's how Europe started, how the success of the EU started. Maybe we have to relearn this, to collaborate. And insofar, also the collaboration that the DC enjoys with the Center for International Studies is a good path forward to bring bright minds together. And I invite all our listeners and readers not only to dive in the book, but maybe also to come with critical remarks. We can only learn from them and maybe endeavor new avenues in one or the other sector.
Absolutely. And it's a very good beginning for the collaboration that you advocate for. Thank you so much. Jochen, where can our audience find the book? And also, if you can share with us, what are the upcoming projects or follow-ups, maybe a sequel, maybe a research initiative, building on this publication, on this book that we presented today?
Thank you very much. The book exists in 3 different formats. You have a hardcover, softcover, but also an ebook version. There are some bookstores that hold the book, but on the usual internet chains that we all know, and I don't want to promote any of them. So basically go into any internet research, type the title in, even partially, and you will find access to the book. in its various formats. So you can read it both electronically but also on paper. What I like, and I heard this from some of the people we met in the meantime, is you can read it in a way that's saying, not everything interests me, but my special interest is, for example, in cybersecurity or in climate change. And then you just take this chapter, but then you
Oh,
might realize, there is something else in the book. So it is something you can approach in different ways. Now, follow up. Well, first of all, thanks also to today. We had already 11 book presentations in 8 European countries.
oh,
There are
congratulations.
maybe one or the other still to follow. Discussions. Yeah, every event creates new reflections. This week I was in Lisbon. Very interesting discussions with the southern partner in Europe. Yeah, there is something to be coming as an aspect we couldn't cover in this book, but it's still not ripe enough to launch the idea today. I'm still waiting for final contributions. And of course, we are looking forward to continue to use the collaboration with you and other partners to continue to, yeah, also pressure our politicians not so much to look at the national interest, but to bring the European cooperation forward. The issue of defense, and hopefully the aggression on Ukraine will end sooner or later, but it doesn't alleviate us from continuing to rethink our strategic towards the United States that will pull further out of Europe. All signs are pointing to this. We need a convincing strategy in the relations to China. And of course, Russia will remain a neighboring country. I know it was very hard in May to tell some of my friends in Ukraine that what they dream of, that Russia may be split into whatever, how many smaller states, is unlikely to happen. So we will have to live with this big, resourceful, and complicated partner next to us. It will never be the partner that we hoped after 89 to create a true partnership with them. But will the situation of being complicated change? I don't think so. I add one last thought. I was yesterday at a lunch of some former colleagues, and then I heard that a colleague like me, almost retired, she's from one northern country. She went already twice for basic military training. She's 60, but she's saying herself, I'm coming from a country that has a direct border with Russia. I cannot afford just saying to my children and my neighbors, defend my country. I can still do some things, not on the front line, but we all can play our role in defending our countries. And to defend our democracy and liberty is worth any effort.
And that's a very beautiful message, and I totally agree that we don't need to be on the battlefield to really defend our country. You mentioned disinformation, for example. Our societies need to be immune to really defend themselves. Thank you very much for this insightful conversation, Johan, and for this really beautiful message at the very end. Ladies and gentlemen, we encourage everyone interested in international affairs and Europe's strategic future to read Europe and the emerging new global order that you can see on the screen now. Once again, thank you very much for joining us for another book talk from the Center for International Relations and Think Tank. See you next time and stay tuned.
Thank you, Ada.
Thank you so much.